Hello everybody, and welcome to Ancient Architects. Please subscribe now to get the latest ancient history news and independent research from around the world. The famous Unfinished Obelisk of Egypt, which sits in a granite quarry in Aswan, is known for its massive size, but also because the work that was carried out on it was never completed. Had it been finished, it would have been the largest obelisk ever constructed by ancient Egyptians. Nevertheless, the fact that it remains in an unfinished state has given us the opportunity to learn more about the ways the ancient Egyptians produced these colossal, important and iconic structures, in the same way that the unfinished moai have revealed the methods used by the people of Easter Island to produce their giant statues. The word obelisk comes from the Greek word for a spit, the long rod used to skewer food for cooking, and it was first used by Herodotus to describe these fascinating objects, clear focal points that dominated the skyline in the areas they were placed. The Greek word has obviously stuck with us, but the Egyptians used to call these monuments tekenu, which means to pierce the sky. But what actually are they? Well, as you probably know, obelisks are tapered four-sided rectangular pillars of stone with a pyramidion on top. When they were erected, they were set on bases, and by deciphering the hieroglyphs, they were typically constructed to commemorate an individual or an event, or to honour the gods. The ancient Egyptians carved their obelisks from a single block of stone, almost always red granite, a type of rock that is most notably found in Aswan, in southern Egypt. In the granite quarries, obelisks would be carved out of the bedrock and then transported on the waters of the River Nile to their destinations where they would be erected. They stood as proud achievements of Egyptian royalty. One of the areas in Aswan where granite was being excavated was in the northern quarries, which is located not far from the modern city of Aswan, and it was here that the unfinished obelisk was discovered. It is believed that the construction of this obelisk was commissioned by Hatshepsut, who reigned during the 15th century BC. She was one of the most important and formidable pharaohs of ancient Egypt, who most notably led her people to the famous land of Punt, which was considered the homeland for the ancient Egyptians. It has been speculated that the queen had planned to have the unfinished obelisk raised at Karnak. It was at this place that another obelisk of the Queen's, known today as the Lateran obelisk, was set up, and it is speculated that she may have wanted the unfinished obelisk to complement it. Unfortunately, the massive obelisk was never completed. At some point during its construction, the workmen discovered large cracks in the stone, and therefore it was decided to abandon the job. The unfinished obelisk has remained where it was ever since. Had the obelisk have been completed, it would have reached to a height of 42 metres and would have weighed more than 1,200 tonnes, which would have made it the largest obelisk ever created by the ancient Egyptians. But it is thanks to the abandonment of the unfinished obelisk that we can see the ancient tool marks, which Egyptologists say gives us a clear understanding of how these monuments were made in antiquity. Here I will outline the accepted techniques for creating the obelisk, before looking at the problems with the methods proposed. From studying the site, we are told that the Egyptians started preparing the suitable granite bedrock by making a series of holes, possibly from copper tools or harder stone, in a line at regular intervals. Next, they would hammer sun-dried wooden wedges into the holes. These wooden wedges were then repeatedly soaked with water, and would gradually expand over time. And although it seems somewhat unbelievable, the power generated by the wood expanding is strong enough to break the granite bedrock and free the block, a process which is actually quite amazing, and could also explain some of the other fantastic feats of rock cutting seen in ancient Egypt. It is interesting to note that the same technique for separating a block of stone from the bedrock appears to have been used by many cultures across the ancient world. Nobody ever devised a better method or technique to create such incredible feats with such basic tools. Even in recent times, quarries use very similar methods involving making a line of holes in the rock, and instead of ramming wet wooden wedges into the holes, which takes quite a long time to achieve the desired effect of splitting the rock face, modern quarrymen simply hammer metal wedges into the holes, which achieves the same result, except much quicker. In larger quarries, whole rock faces are loosened by putting sticks of dynamite into a sequence of drilled holes, which are then detonated by a remote-controlled device. Back in ancient Egypt, when the block of stone was finally freed from the bedrock and seen to be in one sturdy piece, the surfaces of the obelisks were levelled. Evidence suggests that contrary to popular belief that this was done using chisels, it was actually done using small hand-sized balls of the mineral dolerite to pound against the surfaces of the roughly cut obelisks. The process was continued until all the surfaces were perfectly flat. We are also told that these dolerite mallets were also used to dig around the obelisk to expose it, and to create enough space to allow the workers access to pound away the granite underneath, to detach the obelisk from the bedrock. Dolerite is one of the few natural substances on the planet that is harder than granite but is also quite abundant. Most other rocks would simply crumble if they were repeatedly banged against the granite. Once the finish was achieved, the scribes and hieroglyphic artists would decorate all four faces with the religious beliefs and the achievements of the pharaoh of the day. So, that's the official story, but researchers such as Brian Forster, a man who goes into the field and tries these methods for himself, disagrees. He notes that the hardness of the dolerite is about the same hardness as the granite itself, and therefore makes very little impact for the huge amount of work required. And as the unfinished obelisk is 42 metres long, this was a lot of work. It is like trying to fashion a piece of wood with another piece of wood. Then there are these grooves, about 1 to 1.5 feet in width, and cup-shaped. They are evenly spaced and evenly created, and we are told that they are made with a pounding or scraping action with the harder dolerite stone. What do you think? And then there is the problem with the underside of the obelisk. How did people get into the small gap and have enough space to bash it with a lump of stone to cause enough wear to separate it from the bedrock? There is also a second unfinished obelisk at Aswan, with the same crack running through it, and hence why it was discarded. These cracks are so huge that there must have been a great deal of tension on the bedrock to cause it. Does bashing with hand-sized dolerite blocks cause a giant obelisk to crack? Or was the crack actually always there in the bedrock, an old fault line perhaps? To be fair, with enough time and effort, hammerstones could have worn away the granite. It just seems somewhat nonsensical. In recent years, scientists have come up with another explanation for the excavation of the granite, known as thermal contraction. This is the rapidly heating and cooling of the granite, a method that has actually been shown to make scoop-shaped marks, like those seen on the unfinished obelisk. So, if we give Egyptologists and scientists the benefit of the doubt, and the problems identified are actually easily explainable, we are still left with explaining how these giant obelisks were moved. According to a report written in 2007, a deep trench, at least 2.5 metres deep, was discovered as the site was being prepared for tourists. Further investigations revealed that there had once been a canal connecting the granite quarry to the Nile. We are told that once obelisks were completed, they would be simply floated on the canal towards the Nile, where they would be loaded onto barges. This in itself is quite a bizarre claim, and doesn't quite explain the method for moving a 1,200 tonne, 42 metre long obelisk. That's longer than 2 double-decker buses and heavier than 200 African elephants. Would this really have been floated from the quarry to the Nile? And look at it sitting in the quarry. It would have to have been lifted out of its pit and moved. And how many people would you need to lift 200 African elephants? I am yet to see a logical explanation for how they achieved this, but I am of course open to your ideas. To date, only 28 obelisks have ever been found in Egypt, whether erect, fallen or unfinished. Sadly, of these 28, only 8 remain in Egypt, as cities around the world, including Rome, London, Paris and New York, have either stolen them in antiquity or have been given them by the Egyptian officials of the 19th century. Some say these obelisks are displayed in those countries to symbolise Christianity's victory over paganism. Some say they have an occultic significance, symbols of the historic secret societies of the Western world. Egyptian pyramids and obelisks were of great importance to Freemasons more than a century ago, and some even believe that the Great Pyramid was an ancient Masonic temple. Today, we have a 200-ton ancient Egyptian obelisk in the heart of the Vatican. A glass pyramid was built in central Paris, a giant obelisk was constructed in Washington DC, and a pyramid was placed on the back of the American dollar bill. and these are all concepts explored in depth in the fascinating book Talisman, written by Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval. Some people even believe that the ancient Egyptian religion and sun cult never ended, and still lives on to this day, disguised within modern religions and secret societies. So, what do I believe? Well, for a start, I think the creation of obelisks and their movement is still somewhat of a mystery. Brian Forster believes they are far more ancient creations, made before dynastic times but carved onto by later dynastic people, Egyptian kings and queens who claimed them for themselves. Are they therefore symbols of a far more ancient civilization? And although obelisks are universally known monuments of ancient Egypt, could they actually hark back to a much older time? Creating and then moving them in antiquity from the granite quarries, to me, is still a mystery. Were they created by primitive stone pounding, thermal contraction, or both? Or was there some sort of ancient high technology, as Brian Forster claims? Those that re-erected them in the cities of the Western world probably know the truth about the obelisks, and I'm sure they have a greater meaning today than to simply mark Christianity's triumph over the older paganistic beliefs. As some of you may know, certainly those that run independent channels on YouTube, views are down for most people, as independent channels are being recommended far less in 2020. So, it's thanks to Patreon supporters and the new channel members that I can continue to run this channel, conduct new research and report the latest news. So I just wanted to say a big thank you to you. Those that can't or don't wish to donate, that of course is absolutely fine, and your views are very much appreciated. I also have another channel called Space and Planet, and from time to time I'll be uploading new content. It will also act as a backup channel for Ancient Architects, so if anything was to go wrong, you could find me on the Space and Planet channel. I have also just started a Teespring merchandise store, and I'll be updating this every week with new designs. Some look good in my opinion, some are funny while some will be tongue-in-cheek, but sales of merchandise also support me and this channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll be releasing more videos next week. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ancient Architects. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel, please like the video, and please leave a comment below. Thank you very much.